Good morning or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're based. We know people joining us from around the world. Welcome to today's Microsimulation Masterclass on cyber resilience. My name's Marcus Vaughan. I am the co-founder and chief growth officer of Catalyst Technologies, and it's my absolute pleasure today to be the host for today's Microsimulation Masterclass. We've got a really interesting session lined up today, and joined with me from around the world, some very interesting panelists with me today as well. Join with me, we've got Dan Shields, the CEO of RiskLogic, one of the preeminent resilience consultancies in Australia. Dan, good morning.
Thanks, Marcus. Good to be here.
And also join with us from New York is Adam Peckman, the global practice leader for cyber solutions from Aon. Adam, how are you?
Hey, Marcus. Hey, everyone.
Guys, we'll jump into this in just a moment. I did want to walk through the agenda and just a little bit of housekeeping to start off. Today's session is a Microsimulation Masterclass. These were originally designed to assist our clients get through some new functionality and methodologies that we've been driving through our product iluminr. So it will get relatively into product later on in today's session. But to kick off today, we wanted to talk through some of the major current trends that are happening in the cyber landscape. It really has taken off in 2021, as no doubt we've all felt and seen on the news. So we're going to have a look at the current trends and what's happening out there at the moment. Also dive into some of the key considerations for any practitioners and resilience champions out there. Things are changing, the landscape has changed, and from a whole multitude of different levels. So we're going to talk through what we're seeing on the ground when we're working with practitioners and organizations, both large and small. Following on from that, we are actually going to do a dive into some microsimulations. So via our critical event management platform, iluminr, we'll be running through 3 microsimulations, really just the tip of the iceberg of the catalog at the moment. The 3 that we've been collaborating on with Dan Shields as well. Just again, to give some thought-provoking, quick bite-sized exercises to get attention back to the cause throughout the year between major annual exercises. We have left some time at the end of this for Q&A, so please do. We love engagement. If you've got any burning questions throughout the session, there is a Q&A panel. You might have to wave the mouse around a little bit to get there. Please drop your questions in. No silly questions, always up for it. Please send them through and we'll get into them. But without further ado, we might get started. Wow, what a year it's been. It looks like every time we open up the newspaper, we are looking at a new major attack that's underway, and really, really interesting and changing type of attack landscape out there, Adam. Kaseya, obviously a massive attack, Microsoft, Colonial Pipeline, a cyber attack that had just on-flow impacts right across the country, JBS, Facebook, T-Mobile. It really is just no holds barred out there, and it feels like things have really escalated in 2021. But you're obviously pretty deep in the data. You're looking at this at a macro and obviously at a zoomed in micro level. I mean, what are you seeing? What's the data telling us?
Yeah, I think you've started to introduce it nicely. I think unsurprisingly, after all companies across all industries in all geographies spent 18 months and significant investment, rapidly spinning up various digital transformation projects to bring online either new cloud computing capabilities or enable remote working or to scale up e-commerce infrastructure, we have seen a similar trajectory in the volume and materiality of cyber losses. And in particular, we've seen an exponential increase in the amount of ransomware events. Again, fairly unsurprising, given most businesses now have some form of critical dependency on a variety of web-enabled technology solutions across their value chain. Just to throw a stat out, claims from ransomware attacks jumped 336% from the beginning of 2019 through to the end of the year. And the business cost associated with that for just the ransomware component of those losses are expected to reach somewhere in the order of 20 billion this year, just based on the analysis that we've done here at Aon as part of our security risk report for 2021. So unsurprising as to sort of the causal events. You work from home, a lot of digital transformation associated with the pandemic, but still significant spike in events. cyber events, and particularly ransomware events.
It feels like the ransomware market is almost turning into a commercial marketplace. It seems there's no shortage of stories around where vendors can essentially buy ransomware technology and ways into organizations to launch these attacks. So it feels like it has escalated on an absolute scale.
Yeah. So I think that we've had a perfect storm, or a confluence of factors here, right? So there has been the commoditization of ransomware as a vector. You often thought about it as ransomware as a service. The idea that for very little investment on behalf of the actor, you can have the capabilities or pay for the capabilities to instigate a ransomware event of some kind. So you've got the rapid sort of commoditization of the actor space, the cyber hacker space. At the same time, for all these industries that we've seen most impacted by the increase in ransomware events, so sort of most notably, you've seen healthcare, financial services, the public sector, and manufacturers, more broadly, but that sort of both heavy manufacturers right the way through to food and bev manufacturers. All of these have now critical supply chain and operational dependencies on technology. So represent a really salient target for hackers now to go after with quite economical tools at their disposal.
Yeah, it feels like it's turned into a new business model, and business seems to be booming at the moment. This is a really interesting graph that you've dragged out from, I guess, the data that you guys collect here. So just talk us through what we're looking at between ransomware and data privacy breaches.
Yeah, so as you can see, I mentioned the 336%. So that's from 2019, but you can see over the last couple of years, ransomware events in particular, has driven up. Most now is the driving force behind most of the claims we're starting to see within the insurance market, as well as the incident data that we're seeing as to what are the major incident response firms providing assistance toward. So it's significant. You don't see that sort of trending up and to the right that often for any particular type of risk topic. But this one, has been very hot. As you mentioned, the data breach component to all of this as well. Obviously, that may be misleading because I think there's a lot of people now are starting to appreciate, because of the amount of news coverage to ransomware events, they aren't a clear-cut distinction between what we would say the vector is, the trigger of the event, as to what is the consequence of the event. So we're seeing a lot of ransomware events, so some sort of malware that is encrypting people's systems and data, being the precursor to some sort of data exfiltration or ransoming of the data itself. We will disclose this data if you don't pay the ransom, or we have exfiltrated the data during the ransomware event itself. So whilst you were busy trying to unencrypt your data, decrypt your data, we've actually exfiltrated a lot of what we were after in the first place. So I don't want to say it's misleading, but we're still seeing a similar frequency in the amount of data subjects, being impacted by these types of events, if not, the fact that we're seeing, standalone data breaches sort of on the whole decline. And, data breach events, peaked some years back when you think about some of those, large retailers and hospitality groups, hotel groups being hacked. You're not seeing the same frequency of that compared to now the ransomware events. And I think, what's interesting about that is obviously, something that we're obviously near and dear to, which is, ultimately, how does that impact into the behaviours and attitudes within the cyber insurance market as well?
Yeah, indeed. So it like very much looks like organisations now have to deal with, I guess, the double burden of a ransomware attack, a major disruption that's been caused by the ransomware attack, and then dealing with the privacy breach and the regulatory and I guess the brand and reputation issues that come with that as well. So how are you finding? I mean, how are you finding the insurance industry dealing with this kind of spike? Like, it's pretty interesting out there at the moment.
Interesting is definitely one way to characterize it. I think, we do a lot of work either surveying the primary insurance markets or looking at the claims flow to get a sense as to, as I was mentioning, what are sort of the behaviors we're seeing within the insurance market, what are the attitudes to some of this, to some of these events, or even the quality of the risks being presented by companies to the insurance market. Ransomware now accounts for, unsurprising when you look at this graph, accounts for a majority of the insurer losses. Those loss ratios are now up between 5 to 25% across all the large cyber underwriters. And the research we've been doing around some of the the key insurance markets, North America, Europe, UK, and LATAM, and Asia Pacific. Two of the major responses from the insurance markets are the most obvious being increases in insurance premiums. So rates now are generally increasing on average across the entire book, across all sort of segments. They're all increasing by at least 35%. And we're seeing the amount of insurers looking to increase the premiums, the rates that they're charging the insured companies, between 40 and 50%. The amount of carriers doing that now has doubled. So, almost tracking this loss trajectory, you're seeing, the increase in premiums that people are now paying for this cyber, for this, capital protection, this balance sheet protection from this. And I guess the other, the other trend that we're seeing, or the other reaction from the insurance market we're seeing from all of this, is companies can no longer secure, or companies have struggled to either secure or renew cyber insurance policies. The amount of companies, that are now having declinations from the insurance market is increasing. So carriers now are demanding a much higher baseline in ransomware protection. That includes both the proactive, technical security controls, but reactive measures as well, which is something obviously we'll speak to later, around not only your incident response capabilities, but what is your disaster recovery capabilities? What's your business continuity capabilities? If those conditions aren't met now, we're seeing, markets quite happy to decline, offering insurance policy, because they're trying to improve those loss ratios. They're trying to improve the profitability of their business, which has been severely impacted by this trend.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue. I mean, from an observation perspective and working with risk teams all over the world, I mean, what are you seeing as some of those key considerations that risk and resilience practitioners need to take into account, even on that insurance cycle?
Yeah, I think that one realization for a lot of businesses, apart from security, concepts like better security hygiene and actually trying to elevate, the maturation of their security function, has also been that the reactive capabilities to manage some of these cyber threats, ransomware in particular, but cyber threats more generally, are not just limited to the technical security controls. Equally, if not more important in some instances, are actually the business measures to ensure sustainable resumption of commercial operations during and after a cyber event. So as I mentioned at the opening, digital acceleration, adoption of more, Internet of, industrial things, it's exposing more businesses. You can see one bullet point here. All businesses now have some type of technology dependency. When we went, and surveyed a lot of these businesses and asked them what's their state of readiness in terms of, what business continuity plans do they have in place to mitigate financial loss from a disruptive cyber event, 2 in 3 said that actually they have no plan, or if they do have a plan, it's probably not actually one that speaks to cyber events. So I think a lot of realization over the last couple of years has been, we've scaled up all this infrastructure very quickly. We can now work remotely. We can now, networking to a lot of our infrastructure remotely. We're now leveraging a lot more cloud infrastructure, public cloud infrastructure, and like, actually, do we have the right plans in place if those things start falling over maliciously or even accidentally, which we see a lot of as well. And the fact is, perhaps some of the business continuity and incident response planning hasn't sort of scaled as quickly. And so that's something now businesses are trying to reckon with. Okay, how do we go back and make sure business continuity plans aren't, as we call, sort of in a more analog setting, that actually now, align to what we're doing as a digitally enabled business.
Yeah, well, it's potentially the perfect, catastrophe to a certain extent. Certainly one of the observations that we've had is COVID has really put the blinders on a lot of leadership teams in terms of their resilience activities over the past 18 months, which has, we have seen, a vacuum of headspace to do other things outside of, dealing with, our health crisis, which is, and health and safety is obviously very high on the risk radar, the risk register for most leaders, but it has taken away from looking at those other types of risk exposures and resilience methodologies to keep up with a rapidly changing landscape, which has just scaled and moved forward really quickly. Dan, hey, you're working with exec teams, boards, operational resilience teams as well. I mean, what are some of the observations you're seeing through the work that you're doing at the moment?
Well, thanks, Marcus. Well, look, I think what's important to note here is we're seeing the practice of responding to cyber events and where business continuity fits in. So what Adam's talking about here in terms of those observations, a lot from the data, we can back up absolutely in terms of what we see in reality. The way I like to describe it is a disconnect between cyber incident response and business continuity, which, as I said, I think aligns with that and what you've just been talking about. So what does it actually mean? When you've got a cyber attack in place or in train, what we're seeing is business continuity. Organisations are very late to activate business continuity plans as a starting point. They're waiting for clarification in terms of the extent of impacts, the systems that are potentially affected, the forensics to take place. And business continuity is sort of an afterthought in terms of a mitigation strategy for some of the effects that the cyber attack might actually cause to the organisation. So timescale in terms of activating business continuity plans, way too long, way too late. They need to get, you need to start focusing on them very, very early in the piece there. And it's very much about saying, well, look, if we think we've lost these systems or these capabilities, how can our business continuity plans be used to start to restore those capabilities in a manual workaround capacity? Now, that leads us to the second issue that we see there is that we've really got to question the effectiveness of the recovery strategies that are built into business continuity plans in terms of manual workarounds and the ability to restore critical business processes. They're not sensitive enough to cyber attack, and they're outdated in the sense to the types of events that they're built for. So we think about natural disasters and pure loss of IT and all those kinds of things. Well, cyber is different from that because it extends across so many different parts of the organisation in such a damaging way. So there's some of the things that we're absolutely seeing there. And I think the third piece around business continuity on this one is that often your IT security teams need to make the problem worse to make it better in terms of isolating systems as part of the containment strategies. So that actually creates a bigger problem, and business continuity needs to be factored into some of the issues that's going to create during the response phase by your IT security teams. So that's the business continuity piece. I think one other observation I'd make that we're seeing in relation to this as well is around supply chain. Supply chain vulnerabilities, they're becoming a bigger issue. Now, I think we'd probably all agree at the moment, supply chains through this COVID era have been one of the things that have been hit extremely hard. They're under immense pressure due to demand spikes around the world, and also you then couple that with some of the impacts that COVID directly has had on suppliers' ability to manufacture and distribute. There's a big blind spot out there in terms of cyber and supply chain with organisations. They're not aware enough of where those potential impacts from suppliers are if they suffer a cyber attack, and in terms of where you might impact supply chain if you suffer a cyber attack. So it's a two-way blind spot in terms of the understanding of cyber and how it can impact supply chain. And an organisation, a critical supplier that has they're impacted by the cyber attack, flows very quickly into the organisation itself, and understanding what that might look like is something which is a concern that we're seeing out there at the moment.
Adam, I mean, just touching on that supply chain perspective, guess, what's the market's view of this? We have seen some really big supply chain disruptions over the past 12 months in particular from the cyberspace. How are insurers looking at that as well in terms of, you know, what their requirements are to feel comfortable underwriting a risk exposure that can be, you know, catastrophic?
So I think one of the concerns that has been, you know, fairly not, you know, well known for some time has been the concern around aggregation. So, you know, something Dan started to touch on as well, which is, okay, I'm an insurer and a large percentage of my clients are all critically dependent on Azure or AWS or name, you know, what that system is. Okay, that represents risk to me, because actually if we had that event happen, you now have this aggregation where, you know, you have multiple insured all impacted by that particular event. So insurers trying to understand aggregation, I think, you know, is something that we've seen in terms of the underwriting practices improve, which I think is good. I don't think necessarily on the side of the insured, so, you know, companies, you know, general industry, I don't think necessarily that's been as well understood in a digital setting as it probably has been, you know, in a more physical setting, right? Okay, we've got a critical dependency on widget maker ABC. Okay, that's sort of understood. Great. Do we know what that looks like in a digital setting? And I think the other thing, you know, Dan touched on that is good is, okay, outside of critical dependencies on service providers, technology service providers, obviously, you know, the other one is, you know, we're not, you know, companies aren't an island, a digital, you know, in sort of this digital economy. Your suppliers, as well as your customers, all now most often require some degree of connectivity by way of, you know, your digital infrastructure. So, you know, you having a system fall over, or your customers having a system fall over, a key supplier having a system fall over, that may not actually have anything to do with provision of technology, actually may impact your physical supply chain as well. And we've seen a lot of that, whereby it actually hasn't been, you know, your ERP system, it hasn't been your cloud provider. It's actually been, you know, a technology event that's impacted a supplier. And then suddenly, you know, they're a sequence supplier, so they're, you know, delivering products right when you need them on the production process, or your retailers, you know, have their system fall over, or your systems don't connect, and all of a sudden, you know, your business continuity plans actually don't know what to do in those situations, because they're not physical triggered events. They're not a fire, flood, you know, and the like at a distribution center. It's actually the inability to now sort of transact. And, you know, like the stat sort of reads, you know, 2 in 3 companies just haven't yet sort of upgraded, as we like to think, you know, upgraded the business continuity plan in this digital setting. And so I think, you know, insurers are really on top of that now. You know, the amount of questions now around business continuity and disaster recovery type practices, you know, it's now a key topic. So it's not only important for the business itself, but it's actually important in terms of how you're actually able to gain, you know, meaningful capacity and coverage from the insurance market to protect your balance sheet in the event of one of these events. So, you know, it is a very important topic.
Yeah, that last bullet point you've got there in terms of 62% of insurers list business continuity plans for cyber risk is one of the most critical topics. Is this gone from a nice to have to a where is it, or you're not getting coverage type situation in the cyber sphere?
It's gone from, yeah, business continuity, fantastic, to, okay, what does business continuity cover? Is it the inability for you to have visibility on supply chains, production processes, you know, OT and things like that? Okay, what I'm saying, if you have bricking of particular plants and machinery that's mission critical to production, or it impacts your supply chain processes or your transactional processes, you know, it's, do you have business continuity in the event of all of those things? Because whereas once it was, okay, great, you've got business continuity of the event of a fire at a key production location. Okay, great. You can then shift production around your network pretty seamlessly. Great. We understand how you're mitigating loss too. Okay, what happens if your OT that runs a lot of that production process, what happens if that's targeted by a ransomware event? What do you do in the event of? So these are quite systemic risks. as opposed to, maybe much more discrete, single site type losses that they've contemplated in the past. So, it's really a topic that, people are drilling in on now. And I think, it's one that actually businesses need to take more sort of notice of.
And Dan, from your perspective, again, you do a lot of exercising, and your team does a lot of plan development and redevelopment. How far organizations going, or how, I guess, progressed is this discussion on cyber supply chain out there at the moment? Do you think it's still in its very early stages of maturity, and from an understanding from an organizational perspective? Again, macro overview.
Yeah, look, most definitely. I think it's in an immature state at the moment in terms of understanding and then starting to mitigate and redevelop plans that are more fit for purpose. If you look at the last 18 months, we've gone through such a change in terms of organisations having to adapt themselves to a work from home and a remote capability that sucked up a lot of bandwidth, a lot of time and effort into sort of COVID management. But of course, as Adam's demonstrated, the instance of cyber and ransomware has gone up, but we haven't seen organisations catch up to that yet and understand. So look, it's becoming known, and at executive and board level, the discussions are starting to occur. So there's awareness starting to creep in, but that hasn't translated into action in terms of the preparatory plans and the capabilities of staff to be able to implement those.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I mean, it's a journey of continuous improvement. Let's put it that way. Excellent. Gents, thank you very much for that. What I might do, we might keep moving into, I guess, the microsimulation component of today's masterclass. As I mentioned before, typically our masterclasses are really around, I guess, upskilling our clients using iluminr, their critical event management platform, to go through new ways of using the platform, and also new methodologies and functionality that we've been rolling out. Microsimulations is something that's building a lot of momentum worldwide. We've had a huge amount of interest, which has been fantastic, off the work that we've been doing. And we've been building a catalog of microsimulations to really assist organizations build that risk awareness, build capability throughout the year in between those annual exercises, and really try and get teams re-engaged, because it has been a really difficult 18 to 24 months where, as I mentioned before, COVID has taken obviously a huge amount of attention and bandwidth. We have seen a lot of exercises put on the back burner. I have seen a lot of attention just focused on some really specific issues, and everything else has felt like it's kind of fallen to the wayside. So just for those who are new to microsimulations and iluminr, microsimulations aren't meant to replace tabletop exercises or full-scale exercises. They are bite-sized slices of an exercise. So they're really just to get capability from 0 to 1, or 1 to 2, or 2 to 3, by getting a team into a small microsimulation exercise that should take no longer than 5, 10, 15 minutes at most, really just to bring awareness throughout the year, get that engagement, get an aha moment, get buy into a situation that they haven't thought of maybe enough over the past 12 months. And essentially just complement and build that momentum from a resilience perspective. And by pulling all of that together throughout the year and doing these more regular, because they are in these small imposts, you can create, I guess, somewhat momentum in terms of building that story with exec on resilience and what needs to get done. We have developed, as I mentioned, we're building out a catalog of microsimulations, which is well underway, and we've got some absolutely cracking microsimulations available now. We deliver these through iluminr, which is our critical event management platform, which I know a lot of you use from a critical event management and response perspective. We're now also using that very much to assist in that preparation. So what I might do, I will stop talking about what microsimulations are and start actually walking through what we've prepared today. So I know we've been collaborating a little bit on a few microsimulations that are focused on the cyber perspective. So you've certainly provided some interesting guidance from your perspective on what you're seeing in the market. Today, we're going to show through 3, if we have time for it. I know we're cruising through the session. 1 focused on supply chain, 1 focused on a data breach, and 1 focused on a ransomware. So what we will do is a quick walkthrough of what this looks like in iluminr, and the screen you're probably looking at the moment is now iluminr homepage. So for organizations that are fresh to this and new to this, our Microsimulations training center that we have built out allows you to deploy microsimulations to cohorts across the organization and essentially deploy a little walkthrough that will allow you to get into the event rooms, which essentially get our microsimulations up and running. So the first one, I'll do the quick walkthrough just to get people into the situation. So if you're very fresh to microsimulations and iluminr, our walkthrough essentially does a step-by-step walkthrough to get you into platform and explain exactly what's happening next, which will take you through into your event room. It's a little bit laggy with the with Zoom. So we'll go into our event room here. This one's asking us to jump into the data breach. So we'll start with the data breach microsimulation. And forgive the time lag, we are pinging around the world as we speak. And this walkthrough will essentially give us a quick guided tour on what the participant or the team needs to do to essentially get them around the iluminr event room dashboard. By going through this walkthrough, it introduces them to some of the key functionality like our information boards, where we will be housing the microsimulation event, and the task board as well, which is where we'll be housing the tasks to complete in the particular microsimulation. It'll also provide us a quick walkthrough up to things like the document repository, which I'll just show you now, which houses a lot of resilience documents. So when you are a cyber attack, you'll have access to everything that you need off network. I'll click next. And so your teams are essentially have a absolute once over on how they need to complete their microsimulation. But what we might do now is jump into this one in particular. So our first microsimulation is around a data breach scenario. So what we'll be looking at here, and we can see the information down the bottom. This first one is your organization's cybersecurity team has been notified of a corporate network has been compromised and access to a number of critical applications are unavailable until the situation's been resolved. You've also been advised the perpetrator has likely accessed confidential information from your systems, and the extent of the data breach is currently unknown. So again, a scenario where we've got critical applications knocked out, which is likely to cause a disruption, as well as a data breach situation. We've got some uncategorized information here, and we'll come back to that, as well as this article, which is just to bring a little bit of real life into the scenario. So a quick artifact there, which is obviously just for simulation purposes only. And the task that we've assigned to this team is to essentially do a number of things. And I'll talk through these with you. The first one here we've got is categorize the information in the information board into facts and assumptions. And the second one being log any tasks to validate those assumptions. Dan, you obviously spent a lot of time in talking through facts and assumptions with response teams. Why is that such a critical thing to get right and to practice and train into a team?
Yeah, look, it's one of the most fundamental actions a crisis management team or any response team can do is to build up a clear picture of what the event is. So one of the things we see in most major situations in cyber is probably one of the most difficult to manage is an influx of information. You're getting bombarded with so many different pieces of information from different parties around what's happening, the impacts in the organisation, people who need further information from you. So when you start to get that information, you need to prioritise it. You need to start to build a picture of what is actually happening. And what we want to do here is understand what is fact and what is assumption and what's just plain incorrect. The best way to do that is to wade through that information, pull out those facts. And a fact is something you know to be absolutely correct, and stick that into a board so you can start to then log and track a common picture of what's taking place. So that information that you know to be correct, that goes into your fact board, and you can then go back to that and say, here's what's going on. We build situational awareness on that. And then we start to build all that other information into another board there where you can say, okay, well, let's start to validate those assumptions. And some of those will become facts and some of those we can write off because we know they're not correct.
Got it. And obviously we've got here log any tasks are required to validate assumptions. That's a pretty common situation in any crisis event.
Absolutely. So again, the pace of these types of events and the amount of information people are bombarded with, we start to agree lots of things we think we need to do. And if we're not logging those actions or tasks, you'll lose them very quickly, lose track of it. You'll move on to the next thing and you'll start to lose momentum in terms of your ability to manage the event. So logging tasks, who's doing it, when it's going to be done by, what actually needs to be done, and then continue to review that so you stay on track.
Excellent. This just getting into the third task here. This is really getting into the crux of the microsimulation. Identify and list out confidential or sensitive data that's held in systems that you normally have access to, including personally identifiable information, customer names, addresses, date of birth. Just talk us through your experience in this. I know you've worked with a lot of organizations that have been in the thick of it, as well as obviously simulating a lot of events off the back of that as well. Why is this such a critical thing to simulate out?
Yeah, look, one of the things we see a lot of, coming back to Adam's point around ransomware attacks that also then involve data, which is becoming one of the most common things we see. In the early stages of any major event like that, the ability to access reliable information around what's been impacted, what data might have been affected, it's compromised. It's going to take time. There's forensics that needs to take place. So often you're operating in an environment where you don't have all the answers that you need to be able to make decisions and therefore implement actions to start to stabilize the event, start to minimize the impacts. So when it comes to data breach, particularly connected to cyber attack, one of the things we need to understand very quickly is, well, what data may have been taken? And we're not going to get the answers from forensics for a period of time. It probably will come, but it still may not even come from a detailed forensic analysis. So what we want our staff to do on the front line, those people that are the users of those systems, they can be an invaluable source of information for us in terms of understanding what data may have been affected. One of the things we actually see quite a lot at the moment is when you ask that question to a response team in the middle of an exercise or even a live attack, the answers that they come back with, we're actually not sure what data is important to us, what's sensitive, what might be held in those systems. So there's actually a lack of knowledge of what actually might have been compromised. And often what we see there as well is that the registers that hold what is classified as sensitive and confidential is actually on systems that have been compromised and therefore not accessible to you. So being clear about what is sensitive, what is confidential, what constitutes personally identifiable information that could cause harm. These are critical things that we need to think about very early on in the response piece, because they will affect how we go forward in terms of communications, in terms of managing regulators and various other actions that we need to put in place.
Absolutely. The third and final, or the fourth and final task that we've got here is obviously creating that all-important stakeholder map. Again, I'll throw to you. Obviously, a pretty critical, important point of any, again, crisis response, regardless of whether it's cyber or not.
Yeah, well, this cuts across any major event that's going to cause you loss or damage. We've got to manage those stakeholders, whether they're customers, they're IT vendors, there's physical suppliers, they're regulators, board, shareholders. There are so many different stakeholders that are going to be impacted in some form or another. So having that clarity in terms of, well, who is going to be impacted in the early stage and how that will change as the event unfolds. What's the key messaging we want to get to those different groups? And when we come back to data breach, one of the things, particularly here in Australia, but it's a global requirement now, is that we typically have a mandatory or a legal obligation to communicate to those stakeholders if their personally identifiable information has been compromised. I've heard organisations say, well, look, we don't need to tell them for 30 days, so we've got time. Well, the reality of the situation is they find out from other means the damage is going to escalate for you. So getting out early, being upfront with stakeholders around what's happened, but doing it in a way that's planned is going to hopefully start to manage some of the damage that you're going to incur. And there is no good message when you've been, you're the victim of a cyber attack, particularly if there's a data breach. So getting out there early is something that often creates better outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this simulation in particular can be rolled out across a number of teams within an organization, and that's going to test, I guess, their understanding of the information that they have to deal with in their function, the stakeholder map that's pointing to them. As a resilience practitioner or risk practitioner, essentially, you might be launching these micro simulations. That's a really good way to get those feelers out into the organization, get an understanding of what's important to them, to collate that information back up. You can certainly assign these to obviously various different teams and cohorts of the organization and allow them to drop the information back into this. And obviously, doing this via iluminr, it's all recorded. So you've got, I guess, an absolute run through that you can come back and review and debrief with that team around exactly what was collected, what were some of those observations of blind spots, and probably most importantly, what are some of those actions that you as an organization need to take to close those blind spots and improve resilience across the organization. I might jump out of that one. I'm conscious we're flying through time, so we might jump to the next micro simulation in particular. I think the one, if we ran out of time, the last one, let's see where we're going. We are running through time very quickly, so we'll see if we can get through these pretty quickly. We promised 3. We'll attempt to get to as many as we can get to. This one in particular, we're looking at a supply chain situation. So we do have obviously the assessment. Assessment's been done. It's got them up to the process level. The information is sitting down here in the event board. Again, I won't go through the entire walkthrough to get there. So you've been informed that a critical supplier is reporting of a major cyber incident disrupting their critical systems and applications and subsequent operations. They are anticipating disruption of the supplier for up to 48 hours, and they are designated as a critical single source supplier for your organization. Initial information suggests that this may cause operational and reputation impacts. So again, not a light-hearted situation, but probably a very real one for many organizations over the coming couple of years. We've got a couple of tasks here. The first one, locate your crisis management plan. Dan, that's always interesting in a cyber event.
Look, most definitely. The first thing I'd say on this one is that in many cases, this probably wouldn't be a crisis for an organisation or designated as something that would be serious enough to be called a crisis. However, there are enough indicators there to say that this could very quickly escalate and cause major loss there. So the crisis management plan is about it's just implementing a structured process for how you're going to assess the situation, getting the right people together, starting to go through a more ordered process around implementing actions that hopefully in this situation might stave off major reputational operational impacts, but also allows you to have that formal approach in place if this thing suddenly escalates and you would call it a crisis there. What we see though is a lot of people say, well, look, it's a crisis event. How's the crisis management plan going to help me? The crisis management plan should be written to be able to deal with any major events. It shouldn't be event specific in that situation. It's a roadmap to keep you on track when you've got these kinds of situations occurring.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And obviously one of those again, little niggles that tend to come out in major cyber attacks is not having access to your corporate network sometimes. In this situation, you probably do, given the fact that it's a supply chain issue. But obviously it is one of those unfortunate gotcha moments that often happen. I think the second piece is really an important complete impact assessment, focusing on specific issues a supply chain disruption caused by a cyber attack will cause your organization. Now, I think this is where there's an opportunity for any resilience practitioner who's launching this micro simulation to obviously tweak the critical supplier against what their concerns or their top critical supplier list looks like, so they can go and routinely go through the organization and knock certain critical suppliers out to test what that looks like. And that impact assessment is going to be different depending on exactly which supplier that looks like, whether that's from a piece of technology that works with dispatch right through to your client relationship management system. But an impact assessment, Dan, I mean, any comments that you want to make on that in a cyber scenario or supply chain scenario?
Look, the only thing I would say there is coming back to my comment about supply chain being a little bit of a blind spot for organisations in relation to cyber. I think it's going through and doing this as an exercise will really start to open people's eyes in terms of where those connections and those vulnerabilities might lie. So an invaluable activity. And look, when you're in a crisis situation or a major event taking place, this is about looking forward. Doing that impact assessment is about saying, well, where's this going? And most executive teams and crisis teams, response teams don't do that very well. It creates your blueprint for where you go next in terms of your actions and strategies that you put in place.
Yeah, indeed. Our final one here is each team member that's in the micro simulations will log their immediate first stage actions, first steps and first stage actions the crisis management team would want to take to address the situation. And then focusing this, I guess, in some of those areas that we know are going to be heavily impacted: IT security, communications, operations. Dan, any comments or any additional comments in terms of going through that process?
Look, I think the IT piece is around looking at exposures. If your critical vendor or supplier has got a cyber attack, you've got data handshakes coming into your own system. So I think the first thing you really want to be doing there is saying, how exposed are we? Are we also going to be under threat here, or has that cyber attack already infiltrated our own system? So I think that's the first piece around saying, look, let's make sure this doesn't escalate for ourselves in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And of course, coming back to communications, we touched on that earlier on. Early communications, getting ahead of the game with things like social media. Very, very hard to do that, because if this becomes public, then your various stakeholders will be talking about it, and there'll be sentiment building up. But really start to say, well, what are the immediate communication activities we can put in place? And of course, operations. When it's supply chain, we want to be saying, well, what are the operational impacts? Let's get a handle on those very early on, so we can start to predict where they might go. So the last comment I'd say on that is, when it comes to any major event, but cyber more so because of the pace of these, separating into immediate actions that you need to put in place straight away versus the medium and longer term actions. Get those immediate actions happening straight away. Identify what they are. It buys you a little bit of time then to start assessing where this thing's going.
Indeed. Okay, I'm going to leave that microsimulation now. Obviously, the team would be filling that information into the board. I mean, the whole point here is to get them used to tools that are absolutely highly relevant during game day, and get that muscle memory up as well as testing some of those areas, those blind spots, and making sure that they've got answers for the big game day. When it does eventually arrive. The final microsimulation we'll have a quick look at here, and we are starting to run out of time. I'm going to keep some time for Q&A, and we are starting to see some questions come through. Whilst this is loading, guys, if you have questions, please do. I can see there's two that's come through. We'll get to those in just a moment. Any other questions, please start dropping them in now. We do want to be able to give a pretty robust discussion where available. So this one in particular is a ransomware attack. Which we're just loading up the whiteboard now. So IT security have confirmed that the organization has been impacted by a cyber attack involving ransomware. Your critical systems and applications have been disabled due to the encryption of data files. Systems will need to be recovered from a backup with a downtime of 72 to 96 hours. So it's a pretty lengthy period of time there. Our task in this one, this is interesting. So identify all the team members to be involved in your business continuity team for this situation. So Dan, should we talk through, I guess, the agile nature of what that might need to look like?
Yeah, well, this comes back to the comment we sort of touched on earlier on. Don't wait for your IT response teams to have their plans in place, to go through their containment phase and start recovery. Start looking at business continuity straight away. Preempt what could be affected and what you could do. You need your business continuity teams and your BCPs activated. So this is not at the executive level. This is at the operational level. You might have 15 or 20 business continuity plans across the business. We'll work out which ones are going to be affected. Work out who your business continuity members are that use those plans and are required to activate them.
Yeah, perfect. Identify and log any locations where you can access your BCP and record the BCP's last date of update. Obviously, we throw that in there as just a little curveball, taking into account that your systems may be totally locked up, making sure you can still access a BCP, and that BCP update or version number is not from 3 years ago. So it's just, again, it is a little earthy just to make sure that, yeah, it's current, what I've got access to, whether it's printed out in my top drawer or whether it's on file in iluminr and off network, it's relevant. So we've just got a little almost, proof of currency point in there. List the top 5 critical business processes that would be impacted by the cyber attack, assuming that all critical systems applications are disabled. And then I'll jump into the next one as well. Using your BCP, identify the top 3 actions need to be performed to commence recovery on your critical business functions. Dan, you want to talk to in terms of prioritization?
Yeah, well, I think that these actions will really highlight to you just how well designed your business continuity plans are. Firstly, so understanding which critical processes at the functional level are going to be affected. That's step one. I mean, if we're not clear on that, we can't prioritize our time or efforts in terms of restoration. And that's really about saying, well, look, if those critical systems are disabled for that period of time, well, do we have manual workarounds available Do they work? And what we're seeing in most cases is manual workarounds really have not been thought through properly. So great opportunity for you to say, well, if these 5 business processes were affected, how are we going to get them back up and running, or what can we do to mitigate impact in that time period? Now, of course, that's assuming that the backups are untouched and haven't also been compromised, and that 96-hour time frame is achievable. And then the final task there is using your business continuity plan. And what are those top 3 actions? That's about the recovery action plans you've got in your BCPs. Do they actually work? So understanding critical processes is the first step, but coming back to those manual workarounds or other mitigation tasks, really ask yourself the question, will they work in this environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this plays back into Adam's point earlier on in terms of that upgrade to the digital ecosystem that we're now working in. So if we're able to roll this microsimulation out across the organization and working through various different functions throughout the year, we can slowly start bringing that attention back to the currency or that might be out of date to where the digital where the BCP was for the local ecosystem where it is today. So again, this is really designed just to bring some thought, provoke thought, start shining lights on blind spots throughout the year. These micro simulations really are designed to get a small cohort of people together, or individually, if the context suggests as such, to run through those 10 to 15 minute exercises, get a quick huddle, debrief. What are our observations? What are our blind spots? What are our actions to increase this? And essentially bring some more awareness throughout the year between those annual exercises. Dan, thank you very much for that. It's been really good. We've got those micro simulations are absolutely available in the catalog. And what we are doing is providing access to micro simulation trials for 10 organizations. So I have actually just dropped a link into the chat. So for the first 10 organizations that do want to apply for it, we're providing 30 days free access to iluminr, where we'll assist you in terms of rolling out 3 free micro simulations, and that'll give you a way just to test it out. Obviously, for our clients who are already in iluminr, these micro simulations are available. Please touch base with the client success manager. Typically, that's going to probably be either Leon or Rachel as your first points of contact, and we'll work with you to coordinate the delivery of micro simulations accordingly. We might move into Q&A with our absolute 7 minutes to go. So we do have only a couple of questions that have come through, which is really interesting. So I'll get through those now. Again, final chance for any questions. If you do have any questions, please throw them through now. That'll be fantastic. So first question from Sandra George. Hey, Sandra, thank you very much for joining us today. So we're great to understand what may be the future trends around causations of potential data breaches, privacy breaches. We know it predominantly revolves around ransomware and phishing at the moment. That feels like a crystal ball question, but Adam, do you have any data that's suggesting anything that might be tipping from a data point to a trend?
It is a good question. I'm thinking if I know the answer to that, I probably won't disclose it and somehow try to turn it into some IP. But let's be too cute with it. But I think there's a lot of concern about at the moment. Okay, just two things really quickly. I know speaking to a lot of companies, as they've really diligently and really rapidly worked to scale up their work from home systems. Not a great deal of thought had gone into some of these considerations, people working around the world, some people blurring the lines between working from home, holidaying, so all of a sudden you've got a lot of different jurisdiction considerations in terms of the regulatory environment for what data is being captured all over the world by people operating on different devices in different jurisdictions. And, like I was saying before, I think the digital frontier of a lot of companies is always accelerating to meet the commercial challenge, which was in this instance, the pandemic, and how do we, work in that environment. The risk and resiliency and so forth considerations sometimes work at a little bit of a lag to business as usual. So if you can imagine a digital frontier, plowing ahead, sometimes those risk teams are still trying to catch up to, okay, what is the new reality. And so I think, one concern is going to be, what has been missed during that rapid transition. I think the other one is something which we're paying a lot more attention to, which is just the biometric data, or the systems now that are capturing our likenesses for the purposes of authentication and the like. A lot of our teams are concerned about a lot of these apps that people are now using to create videos and so forth. Are those going to be weaponized in the future to use for biometric authentication in terms of security devices, right? Obviously TikTok's the obvious one, right? People are using a lot of using that device a lot, creating a lot of videos. It's capturing people's likeness, their voice, their face, and the like. Obviously, as we progress in our protection of devices through biometrics and moving away from just simple passwords, and we go into this passwordless environment. Are people that have aggregated a lot of that data, are they going to be able to weaponize it in the future? That's going to be something to worry about. Maybe not today, but soon. So that's some immediate thoughts off the top.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's very good. So it's a great question. So thank you, Sandra. The next question we've got here: are microsimulations only going to be available to registered users of iluminr or CQ Command, which is the former name? Yes. Essentially, we are deploying our microsimulations catalog via products. So if you haven't got access to it, obviously, please reach out. As I mentioned before, we're providing access to trials for 10 organizations, so you can get used to it and feel if it's right for you. But absolutely, that catalog's building every day to make it more available for our clients in particular. That's the end of the questions. I've got one final question. I might throw it at you, Adam. Where do you see the future of the insurance market for cyber? And I guess how important do you see resilience practices feeding into that life cycle going forward?
Yeah, I'll answer with the second part first. I think if there's ever been a time where risk and resiliency teams can start to use metrics to quantify what's the ROI for spending more money on prep, more money on planning and so forth, I think now is the time when you've got a market which is hardening. The price of balance sheet protection to hedge against some of these large losses is ever increasing. I think now's the time to actually be able to evidence why all of this good work actually can equate to significant savings, not only if there's an event, but actually in just procuring the insurance to hedge against those events. So I think I think now is the time for these risk and resiliency teams to really lean into this topic and try to get ahead of that. I think the market will continue to harden until we get to a point where the insurers feel comfortable with both their underwriting practices, but also the quality of the risks that they're looking to underwrite. And I think we're still working through that. You only have to turn on the news to see another significant cyber breach or ransomware event. So the market's still working through that. I think now's the time for risk teams to really say we need to invest in order to mature, because we need to signal our diligence, our maturation, not only to the insurance market, but to all business stakeholders, where I think, the baseline of expectations on these things is only increasing. So I think, now's the time to lean into that.
Absolutely. And Dan, one final question for you, not to put you on the spot, but any particular advice or recommendations you'd make to practitioners out there in terms of engaging the executive or the board on preparing for cyber and becoming more cyber resilient?
Look, I think we've got to recognise that, and as we talked about this whole ransomware piece, it's a commoditized industry today, and the only thing that's going to change that, I believe, is that if we start to see some action from both a governmental and organisational perspective in terms of the willingness to pay ransom, the legal framework around that. So it will continue to change and evolve. It will get more sophisticated. It's not going to go away. One of the biggest challenges organisations face in cyber attack at the executive and board level is that the absence of information about what's going on, and being able to make decisions in a vacuum of information is really hard to do, and it paralyses at that level. The demands, we need more information, we need to understand the impacts, we need to know what systems are affected and how long they're going to be down for. Well, often in the early stages of a cyber attack, you're not going to have those answers because there's a process that needs to be followed to get them. Yet the impacts of the event are starting to increase and starting to pile up. Customers are starting to hear about it. Social media commentary is increasing. Mainstream media may have got wind of it. You've got to respond. So you have to be able to put response strategies in place early in the absence of good, reliable, concrete information. Being able to do that is very difficult.
Yeah. Gentlemen, that concludes our Microsimulation Masterclass. So I just want to take just a moment to thank you both very much for your time.